Like, again, going back to do you get yours, right? It's Burger King every day, your way, right away. And that's the way that we're raising young men. And so now look what happens. Now look what happens if we look at the world around us when you have men who are immature in all those ways. Look how they act out, but like a bunch of 2-year-olds. Welcome back to another episode of PPK. I think we may be back to a little bit of a normal rhythm now, right? What's going on, Meeks?
I'm trying to. Just staying busy out here.
Staying
in
busy
the library this time. Back to the old setting.
Back to the old setting in Stubes. 3 hours ahead. And you're missing out on all the fires in California.
Time.
Yeah, you're missing out on all the fires in California. So
yeah, it's getting kind of crazy, dude. You should see our pool. It's just ash.
Pool's ash.
It's so smoky out there.
Yeah. We've had more fires.
That's tough.
And cars are covered in ash.
Wildfires, I think is what they say.
Well, I saw a post today, right? It's like a week after, or a picture of the sky, and it said like a week after California legalized pedophilia with that whole bill. So chastisement is definitely upon us. So I know we normally go to Meeks for inspiration, but today we're going to.
I had to step it up. He threw me a lob off
the
board, and I'm gonna have to windmill that. Speaking of chastisement, that's kind of what chastisements will do to you. I guess for today's inspiration, it's really I've been listening to Father Chad Ripperger a lot, and like my dad mentioned in the last episode, we recently had a talk with another exorcist, Father Gary Thomas, and he was just giving us his opinion and what he believes is a chastisement right now, just based on what he sees. And he was talking about, we obviously see the health crisis, but we have an economic crisis, especially in our country. There's social unrest with the riots and all the craziness, but we also even see like a global weather crisis, or it's just everywhere. I don't know. And maybe at least in our area, we have a weather crisis just with the fires and smoke and everything. And so he believes that this is really a period of chastisement. And when I was thinking about that, it's really just a call for us to step up. And I listened to an episode, or it was a conference rather, Father Chad Ripperger on Effeminacy. And he basically just talked about how to raise a real man and how men today are not real men. And it's really the plague of effeminacy. So I wanted to kind of spend some time as 3 men in different stages in life who are, trying to build a culture of virtue, trying to reach out into the community and just, like our motto is just change the culture from within. And so I wanted to talk about what Father Chad, in reference to St. Thomas Aquinas, church fathers, moralists, scripture. What does it mean to be a real man, and what is it that we have fallen into so much that is really plaguing us as men?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that this is kind of one of my key focuses when I think about ministry and evangelization, is really targeted at men. I think, not to say we're the only problem, but we are a big problem. And I think the lack of authentic masculinity, specifically biblical manhood, and what it means to be a Catholic man, and how does that look lived out in everyday life, regardless of your state in life, and taking our role and our obligation as men, as spiritual heads of our home, as really the servants, protectors, and defenders of all things given to us by God, most specifically women and children, and of course any other gifts. That's such a critical part of even restoring a culture of life, because we live in a culture of death, and I think it's because we've been emasculated as men. We just have a lot of men who've abdicated their responsibility. I know I come from a certain genealogy who had a misunderstanding of what it means to be a true man, and so there's a lot of false bravado. There's virtue wasn't it? It was more about your vices. It was more about your passions and your fleshful desires and fulfilling those, and essentially just kind of like what the culture is today, right? Do you get yours? And I think that's the part where we're saying no. There's a higher calling for us, and I think we're really an X factor when it comes to restoring a culture and a world and a society of which we can kind of look up to and be attracted to in a sense that's life-giving.
Yeah, I wanted to, real quick, just before we kind of dive into it, what is effeminacy? I think we often think of the term like femininity or feminine, but that's actually not what we're referring to. It's a term that St. Thomas Aquinas, who, if you don't know who he is, you probably should, especially if you're Catholic, one of the great minds and philosophers, doctors of our church. But as far as effeminacy, and we can probably put it up on the screen, hopefully. Effeminacy is the unwillingness to put aside one's pleasure in order to pursue what is arduous or difficult. So the church fathers and the church also has the same definition for the word sloth. So spiritual sloth, which is just kind of laziness. So you're unable to let go what is pleasurable in order to pursue what is difficult, what is hard, right? And we know that the being a Christian is hard. But the difference that the fathers have talked about as far as effeminacy versus sloth is the focus on avoiding what is hard. Sloth is, oh, that's too hard, so I'm not going to do it. Whereas effeminacy, which is perhaps more dangerous, is this attachment to pleasure, feeding our appetites, whether that be sensual, intellectual, whatever power, whatever that is, we're constantly feeding our appetite. And so I just think about men today, and I touched on it a little bit in the last episode. You know, the typical man in today's culture, especially in our age, Meeks, it's just constantly feeding our appetite. We wake up, we scroll through the phone, then we play some video games, and then we eat breakfast, probably eat too much, and then we go work out, and then we scroll through our phone again, and then we play some more video games, then we'll watch a show on Netflix, and then we'll go maybe work out again, or we'll hang out with some girls, or it's just constant. And we're never not satisfying that pleasure. And no wonder why we're not doing anything that's actually hard. So then now these men end up getting married, or they're with another woman, or now there's a child involved, and they're not being men. They're like, oh, whatever keeps the peace, because that's actually hard, right? So I'm going to have this attachment to pleasure. So yeah, if that makes you happy, yeah, you know, girlfriend, fiance, wife, whatever, you do you. And if, you know, I'm just going to let her raise the kids, and I'm just going to sit back and continually feed my appetite. I'll just sit on the couch and I'll watch my shows, or I'll watch football, and I'm going to hang out with the boys. You guys do what you got to do. And then this is what we have today, where it's just a plague of just false relationships, broken families, and then there's children being raised in this where they have no personality. There's no virtue anymore. No one's actually striving for something outside of themselves. No one's trying to be men or women of integrity. It's just really, really disordered. And this is why you see it in our culture today. It's whatever you feel. And there's this idea of tolerance and don't hurt this person's feelings. And we want to be inclusive because of this obsessiveness with emotions. And it's really based out of men being effeminate.
Yeah, and I think you look at most parents, and it's not even through just not only through their actions do they show this kind of men, dad, fathers, do they show kind of this effeminacy, but also like they don't even know how to teach it because they never lived it out themselves. So they not only have a dad who's going to do whatever, but it's not like even the, you know, do as I say, not what I do thing. It's like, no, you don't even know how to like teach a man how to be a man. You're just sitting there, you know, doing whatever you got to do to feed your pleasures. And you know what, you had this baby out of wedlock, whatever, you got to take care of it now. And you're not showing your kid how to do it, nor do you even give them the basic instruction on how to be virtuous or anything like that. And, you know, it's always going to go back to the family, as, you know, we always say in the Catholic Church, especially. And, you know, think about, like, for instance, with our dad, Keone, and I don't know if it was as much as what dad was saying, as much as him just grinding and busting his butt to do things and get things done. And so, like, he could have said a lot of things to me about working hard, but the fact that he was waking up at 4 o'clock to go work out before work and then have a full, 9-hour day. Used to be commuting a lot, all this stuff. That showed me how to be a man more than just telling me how to be a man. And those are, two separate things to do. And, then it was like, by the time I got into sports, when I saw what he was doing, and then he would tell me, if you really want it that bad, you gotta go after it. And so like you take that with you and you start moving through it. And that's why I started waking up at 4:00 and, as a sophomore in high school, try to get basketball in and playing 5 hours, doing all this stuff, because he showed me how to do it first. He didn't just say, do as I say, not as I do, and he had both there. That's why it's so important to have both of those things.
Yeah, I think when I look at this whole problem of effeminacy and really just a lack again of authentic masculinity, is we now see the result of what effeminacy has done, because we just see a lot of boys who have grown up. They're age-wise are men, but they're really still little boys. So they lack maturity spiritually, of course. They lack maturity mentally. They lack emotional maturity. And so now you just have a bunch of grown-up boys. And I think they don't know what to do. So, you brought up that point about now there's perhaps a family involved, which is really the sad thing, is now you're infringing upon my vices. Like even the common framework of understanding what a virtue and a vice is, right? Like go up to any 11-year-old today or any 12-year-old, even high school, and say, hey, can you define for me what virtue is? Can you articulate what valor is? Do you know what a vice is? They couldn't tell you any of that, right? They can tell you how to steal, cheat, lie, use people, even if they don't see it as such. But if they described how they were living, it would probably be super selfish, self-centered, self-serving. And I just, so we've got to like hit this thing head on, because that's the problem today. We just have a lot of men who have literally just kind of been spiritual sloths, completely aloof and indifferent. And look at the effect and the impact. I mean, I know I come from a line like that, right? And I think that's the part that I had a choice to make. So I can look at generational, at least the past 2 generations in my home, my upbringing, have not been good examples. And the men in my life, as a young man, were not good examples. They taught me everything wrong to do and not 1 ounce of virtue. So it wasn't about the grind, Meeks, as you put it, right? It was about, how can I cut corners? How can I lie, steal, and cheat my way into success? How can I get me a free meal ticket? How can I get this and that? How can I use people and abuse people? What can I do to satisfy that immediate pleasure that I'm looking for? All of those things. And that's what the culture was serving up, right? Is like, again, going back to, do you get yours, right? It's Burger King every day, your way, right away. And that's the way that we're raising young men. And so now look what happens. Now look what happens if we look at the world around us, when you have men who are immature in all those ways. Look how they act out. But like a bunch of 2-year-olds, right? They have no emotional control, no impulse control whatsoever. They lack any sound judgment or prudence when they make decisions. And now it's always somebody else's fault. It's a blame game. It's always somebody else's fault.
Yeah, I wanted to go over the 4 different types of effeminacy. So for the listeners out there, just for us to know, maybe we fall to a particular type of effeminacy, especially as men, that we can really hone in on, and that's what we're going to target. For those that like sports, or those who like, lifting, if you have a certain area that you're deficient in, your left hand or a certain muscle group, you attack it so that you can improve on it. So I think just really us talking about the 4 different types, and what is it that maybe you may be deficient in or struggling with, and that's where the devil's gonna try to attack you. But that's also the area that God is gonna work with for you to grow in the most virtue, and for you to honestly just work towards sanctity. So the first one is the sensual feminacy. And what St. Thomas talks about is, this is kind of the idea of the over or hyper focus on touch. So if that is food, right, or laying around, just lying down, the pleasure you get from that, any physical touch or sensational touch, that's the sensual effeminacy, where you're just so succumbed to overeating or just being lazy, whatever that is. And the second one is appetitive. So think of like appetite. So appetitive effeminacy is really the pursuit of emotions. It's just constantly whatever I feel at the moment. I feel like I'm going to keep doing this. And that's kind of what you talked about. Men don't have prudence. Mm-hmm. And prudence is essentially taking the universal and applying it into the concrete. And what does that need? What does that require? It requires right reason and emotion governed by your reason. Right. And today we don't have prudence. Why? Because we do whatever we feel like. Do you, man? It's whatever our emotions are. And that's really the appetitive effeminacy. We're just constantly feeding our emotions, whatever feels good. This is why men can be hot-headed. We can be so quick to anger or lust or whatever, because it's constantly, we're never learning to gain control and custody over our emotions. So that's the appetitive. The next one is intellectual. And I think especially right now, there's a huge temptation for this intellectual because of, I feel like a lot of people are, with this downtime, they're learning more about whatever it is that they're interested in. They're learning more about politics. They're learning more about their study. They're learning more about the world. They're learning more about fitness, whatever there is, right? They're diving into it. And the issue here is if you're just constantly feeding curiosity, you're not resting in the truth. And that's what St. Thomas and Father Chad Ripperger talks about, is the goal of man is to pursue the truth, find the truth, and then rest in the truth. But the temptation is no, always learn more. Feed yourself. And that's an emotional. It's a pleasure we get out of it. And I think a lot of people who know, even I found myself when I was looking more and more into politics, it can be addicting. You're constantly researching the new thing, right? And people on social media, you're following all these accounts and you have this attachment to always look on social media because what's the news for today? And I want to be in on it. Or what's the latest music? You kind of want to be in the know. And that's that intellectual effeminacy where you get that pleasure from constantly being in the know, being curious, and you're not getting any room for God to actually work because you're so driven by that emotion. And then the last one is volitional effeminacy. So volitional effeminacy is basically just you seeking to do your will instead of God's will. And think about, I mean, that's just it right there. If we can sum it all up, that's pride in general. The root of all evil is pride. And I just think men in general can be so prideful. And I just think even in myself, as I'm trying to, like I said in the beginning of this episode, with this chastisement and talking to people and growing in my faith, it's like, this is game time, dude. Look at the world around you. You think you have time to just, I'll get to it. I'll just play 2K right now and just hang out with Meeks and we're chilling. Like, no, dude, look around. This world is in shambles and it's time for you to actually step up. And as I was looking at this, it's like the Lord starts to reveal just how prideful I can be. Every moment there's like the devil's trying to turn something good and make it pride so that I can start to seek after my own will instead of the will of God. So those are just the gist of it. Like we said, just encourage you to listen to Father Chad Ripperger. It's called How to Raise a Man, or look into St. Thomas Aquinas on effeminacy. But that's really the 4 types of effeminacy. And I think for those of you listening, just kind of spend some time after this to reflect on, Lord, what is it that I'm really struggling with? Is it that sensual? Is it the appetitive, the emotions? Or is it the intellectual? Am I constantly reading or in the need to know? And the last one is, am I just struggling to do the will of God? Am I resistant to what he says? And I'm just hyper focused on my goals, my dreams, my ambitions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, that's kind of like exactly what you're talking about. It's kind of why I decided to do like this sort of, 60-day Exodus thing that we're doing, because the reality is like the amount of time that you spend, just wasting or not being like present in the world. And like, I think this last week that I've been doing it so far, just feeling so much more refreshed and at peace, just because like I don't have to like entertain myself 24/7. I don't have to try to like be looking for something. Like, sometimes if I'm not, talking to people or there's nothing on, like I'm going to put in music. And sometimes it's like when I'm walking somewhere, like just take the music out, just sit there and walk. Like that's it. Be still, like chill out. And, cause like for us, talk about all the time being on the podcast, and me and Kelly preparing for marriage. Kelly a lot closer than I am, but only about like 9 months. But just us both, being super close and to spending forever with somebody. It's like you have to step up and really figure out now where your vices are and where you're weak. And I think it says in one of the Gospels maybe, or in the Bible, how the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak.
Mm-hmm.
And just like our issue is not knowing. Like, we know a lot of good. It's just like doing what that's the hard part.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, when I sit and I don't have to look like straight go to my phone then what do? You get your butt out of bed. That's what you do, because you don't have to sit there anymore. So then it's like, well, what are we moving to? And like, that's the thing now is like, now when I'm sitting and, you know, I kind of have time to chill, I'm just thinking about what I have to do. You know, am I fasting today? Did I already hit the chapel? Did I do the rosary? Could I be reading scripture? And that's what keeps you constantly going, instead of being in this like effeminacy of like, I'm just going to keep doing, like, you're never going to get out of it. And so like I said, like doing these things, and something that I hope to keep practicing is just like, don't be on your phone unless you need to. Just try to keep educating yourself, because man, it is tough. And like, it's crazy when you aren't on your phone and you're not like, and you're just focused on, I don't know, doing like productive things or spiritual things. Temptation isn't as easy to come across because you're focused.
So yeah, I think a big part of like when you're doing the Exodus 60 weeks and what Keone's been talking about, a lot of that focuses on like the lower faculties, right? That's outside of the intellectual part, which would be a higher faculty, being able to use reason. But when you start to kind of cut those things out, and now your will is governing your passions and you're focusing time on growing in your knowledge, then you're no longer, so at the mercy of the way the culture blows or the way the wind blows, and you're just less susceptible to error, right? I mean, that's a big part of it. Even listening to Father Chad, is because modernism is so, just so much at the core of every institution, and the culture and the media, that you're actually bound to slip up, right? And you don't even know it. So this whole time you've been, it's like somebody putting, antifreeze in your iced tea, and you've been drinking it for a long time now, and you couldn't smell it, you couldn't taste it, and all of a sudden organs start shutting down. And I think that's the part where it's a little bit of poison and stuff if you don't stay up on it. And I think that's what's key, doing something like Exodus 60, Exodus 90, just practicing self-mortification, and because you're putting those lower faculties in check and you're letting them know who's in charge.
Yeah, something that I wanted to bring up, as far as, I think we spend a lot of time just like bashing what we do wrong and what's wrong with certain things. But I'm glad, Meeks, you talked about, Exodus 60 and doing some self-mortification, a lot of fasting. But one thing two things I wanted to bring up. The one is, when we're trying to become men of virtue, when we're trying to get rid of this effeminacy that's so prevalent in men today, in order for us to grow in virtue, we need to set a schedule. It has to be consistent. So what time are you waking up in the morning? And just obviously this depends on your state in life, but wake up consistently at that time, and then go to bed at the same time, and trying to make that consistent. Why? Because now you can plan, okay, I'm going to do my morning prayer, and then I'm going to maybe pray my rosary at lunch, and I'm going to do before dinner, because it's at the similar time, I'm going to spend some time with scripture. And then I'm going to do my examination of conscience before bed, because it's at the same time. The problem with us not having a schedule is, if we don't have a schedule, we don't know what we're going to do. And if something comes up, we're more likely to drop our faith.
Yep.
Just look around. It's always an afterthought. And so setting a schedule is like, okay, I know my schedule. It's consistent. We are expecting it. We can prepare for it, so that when that moment comes, 12 o'clock comes, I'm praying my rosary, and I've been doing it. And that's real virtue. Regardless of what you feel at that day, you're making the exercise of your will and saying, no, I'm going to do this regardless of what I feel. And that's really overcoming that effeminacy, is relinquishing that attachment to pleasure. The second thing I want to talk about, which I kind of just led into, is detachment. And Meeks was really talking about that. That's what fasting is, right? You're working on just being detached. But I think in general, Father Chad talks about this. We think of the state of the world today, all the problems, whether it be in our country, whether it be in our church, whether it be in your own family, in your own faith walk, just being detached from it. And I think Father Chad made a really good point, because I think people have a temptation of detachment meaning to be indifferent, or to meaning I'm detached, so that means I don't care what happens. Yeah. Like, whatever. No, detached means you do your part, but the result or the end is always in God's hands. So I think the perfect example is the state of the church. I think all three of us can agree that we are really upset with maybe some clergy, with some big level influencers in the Catholic realm, especially with the Black Lives Matter stuff or whatever it is, right? And, we wanted leaders, and we weren't really getting that. And especially in a time of maybe turmoil or unrest. And we can sit there and be angry about it. And you can be, furious, and you can let it harm your faith, right? What's wrong with our church or these men? And you're starting to bash them or whatever that is. And what Father Chad was talking about as far as detachment is, no, you do your part. You maybe write a letter to your priest or your bishop, or you spend some time fasting for them in prayer. But at the end of the day, it doesn't steal your faith. It doesn't rob your peace in the slightest. Mm-hmm. So if you hear about an abuse scandal, it'll hurt your heart to the point where you want to pray for them, but it doesn't shake your faith.
Right.
And that's what real detachment is. And I think of the state of the world today, and I think this is why I'm so glad, Meeks is doing what he's doing, and I'm not really on social media anymore. Mm-hmm. It's like people are telling me, oh, did you hear what happened with this? Or you look at the weather and the fires are coming with here. And I'm like, and it's a point where, am I worried about that? Yeah, I take it to prayer. Do I look every once in a while to make sure I'm still informed? Yes. But I'm not obsessed with what is happening. I'm not constantly feeding that appetite, that curiosity, and being addicted to it. And I think right now, we think of the state of the world. Is your soul ready for what is to come?
Yeah. I just did a post today talking about that, because like everyone's, and we're all tempted towards it. So I'm preaching myself primarily, but if your whole stock and weight is put into the world, the culture, the government, a movement, whatever, a specific person, a specific priest or clergy, or a specific Catholic personality, you're bound to be discouraged, disappointed, upset, and led to despair, because they're all things that are temporal. They're all things that are not free from sin. So therefore, put your faith and trust in God. And I think those people whose faith are shaken and robbed, you'd have to question how deep was their faith to begin with, right? And so, but Meeks, can you maybe, as we talk about some potential things to do, I know you mentioned this Exodus 60, but maybe you can share some of that discipline, that structure that maybe other people can find of use that they can put into application for themselves.
I think some of the things really is geared around like getting rid of excess, honestly. It's more of like, is Instagram in itself a bad thing? No, not necessarily. Is going on it 3 hours a day a bad thing? Yeah. So like, obviously I still go on because I'm the one that runs the Priest Prophet King account. So I'll do that if I need to, or like I'm trying to work out some things with, I had one of my friends actually want to interview me about like youth ministry through this podcast. Like he wanted to interview me about PPK. So yeah, if I need to talk to them, I will. But my free time is not spent there. And so just the idea of consciousness of what you're doing, that's what Exodus really is about. Mm-hmm. It's not so much like, if me and my friends are watching the game, I'm in college, I'm going to watch the game with the friends. But is that what I do as like my building? It's like, I think the difference really is like when you're before Exodus, or kind of like what I was doing was, oh man, I really want to do the rosary, but I'm watching the game right now. Instead, I'm saying, if I have the game tonight, then I'm doing the rosary before. But if I'm watching the game, I said, man, I really want to watch the game, but I have to do the rosary. So you have that split, and that's really the focus where it's at. It's about just having temperance, and temperance is like the biggest thing for men. And it's like alcohol, not a bad in itself, excess, all, you play the game the whole way. And I think that's really the point of it, is just like, it just makes you aware every day. That's really what it's about, making you aware every day, because then okay, even if I went to mass this morning, I went to 6:30 mass. Even after that, okay, I got to make time for the chapel or the port over in Catholic Disneyland. And okay, when I do that, I need to do the rosary, and just like that's all it does. It's making you make sure you're putting your time in the right places, and all the while you don't even realize that you're not even taking that look at temptation, because you don't have any space for it.
Yeah.
Like when you have time to chill, you're like, all right, if I'm chilling, it's going to be whatever it is, watching the game, or maybe you're just reading scripture, or you're spending time with your family or your friends. So you're just not in this time, just kind of sitting there, and only time you have. And then when you start thinking, when you're sitting and you're just kind of chilling, instead of just scrolling, you're just thinking about your own life, and you're reflecting naturally. That's what we all do. We're sleeping and you don't have your phone there. You're just kind of like looking up at the wall, and you're just thinking. And that's what you should be doing, constantly reflecting, constantly being conscious of what's going around you, what you're doing. And like, that's really the point, I think, that helps Exodus the most. Obviously, the things that they have you do, rosary, all that kind of thing is good. but being conscious constantly of what you're doing and how it affects you is probably the most important part.
Yeah, I think if anything, a couple of points that you made makes, I think, all things in moderation, right? So I think St. Thomas Aquinas was a big advocate of, somewhere in the middle, right? He believed in prayer and study, but also leisure. And I think that all in a healthy way. And it's just really drawing the line between what's an ideal and a value. So if we say God is important to us, if we say faith is important to us, but I don't pray, then it's an ideal, it's not a value. But if I value my faith, if I value God, if I value my family, then I'm actually going to make time. I'm going to sacrifice. I'm going to schedule it. I'm going to provide structure. And that's living a disciplined life. We, especially as men, we as men need structure. We respond better to regiment and to discipline, because if not, what are we tempted to do? To be lethargic, because the devil likes two types of people. One who's completely idle and aloof and indifferent and not doing a dang thing, or the other is an overly busy person, right? Because then if you're overly busy, and I mean that with the worldly things, then you don't have any time for reflection, as Miko just said. You don't have any time for, to think about like these crazy times in our life, to think, wow, man, what if the world, that's the question. What if the world is going to end sometime soon? Where are you headed? Because there's only two places. It's heaven or hell. So are you doing any reflecting in that moment to say, dude, where is my soul? Because in the end, this body, we'll be resurrected at the second coming, right? And I guess if it is the second coming, here we go, right? But where is my soul? Because that's what I'm going to be judged on, not how my body looks, not on my bank account, not on how many degrees I have, but on the state of my soul. How much charity, how much love, how much knowledge of God and faith, and how did I live that out? So I just think it speaks to the structure, the temperance, the moderation that we all need to, especially as men.
Yeah. One last thing I wanted to talk about was just examining your conscience. And I think something that's so helpful is if at the end of the day, you didn't discuss how God worked in your life in that day, you don't discuss how you sinned, what you could have done better that day. Like, man, I was really impatient with my parents, or dude, I was so rude with my coworker, or I was really lazy this morning. You're like really understanding, like, this is where I fell today, and just having that humility, like, just man up, take it. You messed up, and just having that conversation with yourself, or if you have a significant other, or a family member, or an accountability partner, whatever that is, having that examination of conscience every day. And imagine if you were to say, like, every day, Lord, you worked on me this day. I struggled with this. Help me do better tomorrow. So when you are tempted to fail tomorrow, you see it as a gift. Like, man, I am really being tested right now, but I know I struggle with patience because I just examined that last night. So this is an opportunity to grow in patience. And what the fathers have talked about, Father Chad talks about, is you get the grace to get better at that and build the virtue after you've exercised your will. So you don't become patient before you exercise patience. You become more patient after you've said, I decide to be patient right now. And then it'll become easier over time. And I think it's something we recognize in everything else except our faith. We recognize that I know I'm going to be sore right now and it's going to hurt, but the next time I bench, it's going to be a lot more and easier. But like with our faith, our brains just start to melt and we don't understand how to build virtue or how to examine our conscience and everything. So I just want to just call it all men, but everyone, all faithful, to really start to examine our conscience because the times are tough.
Meeks, last parting words.
Yeah, and for young people, I think you really got to look at like the kind of father you want to be, because that's something that like impacts me a lot, and the kind of husband I want to be. Because Father Chad Ripperger was talking about how woman was made not to be man's servant, it was to be his helper, and that means that she's helping the task that the man is supposed to do. So you look at it and you don't want to be the father in front of your kids that has to moan and groan or doesn't ever want to help his wife because he's had such a long day and all this stuff. And when he's home, all he does is go on his phone. He ignores everybody and goes on the TV. Like what you're doing, and if you're practicing basically effeminacy in this case, or just laziness, like that's going to reflect on your marriage, and it's going to reflect on how your children grow up and understand virtue and how to be a man. And so I think that's something to keep in mind, something that I keep in mind like every day, obviously, as like I said, preparing for marriage, just about to sign up for marriage prep and all this kind of stuff. So just realizing those things and just understanding that like your role is humongous as a man, as a spiritual father, and just someone who's supposed to portray the cross in your family. who's supposed to be a servant first and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind as I keep it in mind, because we all know I'm the most impatient human being at Franciscan University, and a very judgmental fella, and all the stuff that I need to work on. And for all my friends, they probably know that, but just keeping that stuff in mind.
Hey, I don't know where you get that from, son. I don't know where you get that from. I'm pretty patient myself, and
must be in the water. It's that ashy water.
It's
making
water.
us all impatient.
Yeah, and I would echo both of what you have to say. Is I think we have to aim higher. We need to we're supposed to be Christ-like, and I think that's really the goal. Is how are we emulating Christ like every single day? And if you're not, St. Thomas Aquinas would say the first step towards holiness is humility. And so I think we need to practice humility. We need to know who we are before God, and really we're nothing without him. So we just kind of encourage you all to listen to this, to kind of process it a little bit, maybe take some time to reflect, right? Go and sit in silence or sit in a chapel if you can, but at the very least, just sit before God and ask him what he wants you to get from this. Meeks.
Yeah, and I think on Father Chad's last video, I don't know if you guys saw it, but he was talking about liking, commenting, and subscribing to Preach About King. It was a great talk. You guys gotta watch it. But I think he said that something about someone help out Colin again. I don't know. He's caring too much again.
Yep, Colin had a little bit of rest for his back, and now I think he just wrote us and said that it's aching again, right?
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, we got to send him a Costco-sized box of Icy Hot, because we need to help out Colin. So, we thank you guys for joining us again for another episode. Continue to keep us in your prayers. I hope that this helps in your own spiritual walk, and we just ask that you continue to share, like, comment, subscribe, and let everybody know that we desire for you to grow in holiness, and we desire to see your face in heaven. So until the next episode, get holy or die trying. Peace.